Hi hamster lovers and welcome to Pancake's channel. This week I'm going to be doing the highly requested part 3 of reacting to my subscribers' hamster cages. The first cage was sent in by Maddie's Hamsters on Instagram. This cage belongs to an adorable dwarf hamster called Buzz. It is the IKEA Detolf hamster enclosure, which is excellent as it provides around 1,000 square inches of floor space. I really like the big sand bath with the deep sand, as well as how cluttered the enclosure is as it will make the hamster feel safer. I really like all of the different foraging toys, sprays and textures that you've added as they're very enriching. The burrow starters and the platform are also great, and so is the wheel as it's a good size, and the terracotta pot and the different ceramic hideouts. This cage is absolutely amazing, but one thing I'd say would be stuff the gaps in between the bendable bridge with moss or toilet paper. This will prevent their toes from getting stuck in between the gaps of the bendable bridge. The cage also has 10 inches of bedding, which is excellent as that's enough for them to burrow in. Buzz is very lucky to have such an enriching setup. The next cage was sent by My Little Pets on Instagram. This is another IKEA Detolf setup, so it has around 1,000 square inches of floor space. A dwarf hamster is going to be living here. The cage also has around 9 inches of paper-based bedding, which is enough for them to burrow. I really like the peek-away hideout underneath the bedding. I also like that you've put moss in between the gaps of the bendable bridge and provided different substrates. One thing I would say would be turn the fairy lights that go around the enclosure off. This is because having a natural circadian rhythm and following the natural light cycle is very important to hamsters. I'd also recommend putting some soft, dust-free orchard grass, meadow or timothy hay across the top of the bedding, as well as some more forage and scatter feeding their food, as this will enrich their natural foraging behaviours. The next cage was sent in by Curious Hamsters on Instagram. An adorable dwarf hamster lives in here. The cage is 713 square inches, which is excellent as it's above the minimum of 620 square inches. They also have 10 inches of aspen bedding, which is excellent as that's enough for them to burrow. I really like all of the branches and different substrates that you've added in, as well as the nice big sand bath. The DIY foraging toy and the terracotta items are also really nice touches. This cage is absolutely amazing and I really like how cluttered it is. There's a lot of enrichment, which is excellent. There isn't anything I'd really add, it looks amazing. Moving on to the next enclosure, a male Syrian hamster lives in this one. I really like how you set it up and all of the different platforms as they're enriching. I also like that you've added different substrates, including beach chips in the seagrass container. The branches are also a nice touch. This cage is 780 square inches, which is large enough. It also has 9 inches of bedding, which is enough for them to burrow. It's great that you've also used aspen shavings in the bedding as this will help support their burrows. The peek-away hideout under the bedding is also really cool. I know you said he doesn't have sand because he's allergic, but sand is necessary for keeping their coat healthy. I don't think the hamster was allergic, it could have just been that the sand you used was quite dusty. Dust can cause respiratory infections in hamsters. I'd strongly recommend using calcium and colour-free reptile sand. This is one of the best and safest types of sand. If you do decide to get a sand bath, then I'd strongly recommend putting it in front of the wheel. That way all of that platform space won't be wasted. And if the hamster decides to burrow underneath the sand bath, then it won't collapse on them. Overall, I think your cage is really good and your hamster is very lucky. The next cage was sent in by Ritzy the Hamster on Instagram. This cage is home to a very cute Syrian hamster. The cage is 775 square inches, which is large enough, and they also have an 11-inch wheel. This is great as it's large enough and their back won't bend while they're running on it. They also use Chipsy Classic bedding. According to hamsterwelfare.com, Chipsy Classic bedding is a mix of pine and spruce bedding. Pine bedding is dangerous for hamsters because it can cause respiratory infections. It can also irritate their skin and their respiratory system. Instead, I'd recommend using hemp, aspen or paper-based bedding. These are the safest types of bedding. These hemp horse wood shavings are really good as they're cheap and they come in large amounts. I would recommend adding some more bedding across the whole of the enclosure. That way the hamster can burrow. To make the enclosure a little bit more enriching, I'd recommend mixing some hay into the bedding. It would also be a good idea to spread some over the top. That way when you scatter feed their food mix over it, it will enrich their natural foraging behaviours. I'd also recommend scattering some more forage over the top of the bedding, as well as potentially getting some sprays. You can get sprays online from websites like Amazon or Etsy, but you may be able to find them in the bird section of your local pet store. I can see you've got a millet spray there, which is good, but it might be good to add more of a variety of sprays. Some more things you could maybe do to enrich the enclosure would be to put the sand bath on a platform. Instead of having the sand at the bottom of the enclosure, you could put it in a dish and then put that dish on a platform. That way if the hamster decides to burrow underneath it, it won't squash them. And it will give you more space to put more bedding. Some other things you could add would be a multi-chamber hideout, a terracotta pot, some more different substrates such as cocoa coir, beach chips, cork granules or corn cob bedding. Branches, moss and foraging toys would also make an excellent addition. Adding some more hideouts would also be a good idea. I hope you found my commentary useful. Thank you for submitting your enclosure. The next cage was sent in by Casper and DJ on Instagram. This cage is home to an adorable dwarf hamster called DJ. They will be upgrading the enclosure, which is good. I'd recommend upgrading to something that's over 775 square inches, which is 100 by 50 centimetres. This will reduce the likelihood of them displaying boredom behaviours. I like the wheel as well as the cork log and the branch. I'd strongly recommend putting some soft dust-free meadow, timothy or orchard grass hay over the top of the bedding, then scattering some forage over it. It would also be a good idea to scatter feed their food. This will enrich their natural foraging behaviours. I'd also strongly recommend adding some sprays such as flax, millet, oat, wheat or sorghum. It would be a great idea to also add a sand bath and different substrates. A slate tile or a terracotta pot or dish would be excellent. This is because it can help wear down your hamster's nails. Rough, disinfected pebbles can also help with this. Please remove the chewable peanut hideout as it's not safe. This is because they're made using sawdust and honey. The honey entices the hamster to eat it, but the sawdust can cause internal blockages. If you would like to enrich your hamster's enclosure even more, you could add a multi-chamber hideout, some platforms to put heavy items on, different substrates, multiple hideouts, a sand bath, some more branches, and perhaps a tube. Also, please make sure they have at least 6 inches of bedding to burrow. Thank you for submitting your enclosure. Your hamsters are adorable. The final cage was sent in by Clara and Twixie. This cage is home to a very sweet little dwarf hamster. Here is the cage. I really like the DIY underground hideout. The DIY cardboard wheel is also really cool and it looks large enough. The hay and nesting you've added is also really good. And so are all of the sprays, forage and moss. The DIY multi-chamber hideout is an excellent idea. I also really like the branches you've added. The foraging toy is really good and the moss adds a really nice pop of colour. The paw prints on top of the foraging toy is so cute. It's also wonderful that you have a sand bath full of safe sand with a hideout in it. The hideout will offer them privacy while they're bathing. Your upgraded sand bath is even better though, because the terracotta pot also adds a different texture and the sand bath looks larger. Overall, I think your enclosure is brilliant. There's nothing that I'd do to really improve it. One tiny thing I'd mention would be to remove the little pebbles from the water bowl. This is because they're so small the hamster could potentially pouch them or swallow them. This could cause an internal blockage. The water bowl looks small enough that the hamster wouldn't sit in it. But if you were concerned about that, I'd recommend getting a larger rock to put in it. That's the end of this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you to everyone who submitted pictures of their enclosures for me to react to. I hope you found my commentary useful. See you next week. Bye!